Zechariah chapter 4 verse 10. Who dares despise the day of small things, since the Lord rejoices to see the work begin? Introduction: the precise action for a miracle. Let's be honest, faith has gotten a bit of a bad reputation. We've been taught to treat it like a feeling. If the mountain doesn't move, the usual verdict is, you didn't believe enough. Apparently, we just didn't feel spiritual, pure, or goosebumpy enough that day. No wonder so many people end up exhausted, trying to feel their faith into existence. We close our eyes tighter, pray harder, and hope we sound convincing enough to God. But here's the thing: when the disciples couldn't heal a demon-possessed boy, Jesus didn't roll his eyes and say, "You guys just don't feel it." Instead, he gave them something measurable: because of your little faith. Then he said something even more surprising: if your faith is as small as a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. Wait, what? The solution to little faith is something small. That's not a contradiction, it's a clue. Jesus was speaking kingdom logic. In heaven's economy, faith works like currency. Miracles aren't vague emotional vibes, they're precise transactions. The mustard seed isn't about weak faith, it's about the smallest exact action that activates divine power. The one-coin proof. If you're still skeptical, look at Peter and the temple tax, Matthew chapter 17. The tax collectors corner him: 2 guys, 2 taxes, no money. Jesus tells Peter, go fishing. First fish, first coin, problem solved. Let's break it down. 1 action, cast the hook. 1 result, catch the first fish. 1 outcome, find 1 coin, the exact amount needed. That's divine precision, not wishful thinking. No jackpot. No net full of goldfish carrying credit cards. Just the exact coin required to fulfill the need. This is the heartbeat of the book. Miracles don't come from how passionately you feel, they come from how precisely you obey. The $1 theorem. In this book we'll unpack how the mustard seed, the woman's single touch, and Peter's 1 coin all point to one liberating truth: faith works in measurable units. That's why we'll talk about what I call the $1 theorem, a modern-day mustard seed act. $1 isn't much, but it's just enough to prove whether you're trusting God or your calculator. You'll discover how little faith is actually powerful, how heaven tracks obedience in exact units, and how stories like King Joash's 1 arrow and Naaman's 7 dips reveal the precise language of miracles. So stop stressing about how strong your faith feels. Instead, start doing the one simple, measurable thing God tells you to do. That's where the mountains start moving. Chapter 1. The Paradox of the Smallest. The scene in Matthew chapter 17 is one of the most frustrating and compelling moments in the Gospels. The disciples, fresh from commissioning by Jesus and having previously executed miracles, encounter a desperately ill boy seized by a demon. They try, they struggle, and they ultimately fail. When the father brings the boy to Jesus, the Lord casts out the demon instantly. The disciples, confused and perhaps a little embarrassed, ask Jesus privately, "Why could we not drive it out?" His answer is perhaps the most famous and, simultaneously, the most misinterpreted diagnosis in all of Scripture: because of your little faith. He then delivers the equally famous prescription: "For truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Matthew chapter 17 verse 20 NIV. Stop and consider the paradox here. If little faith is the disease, how can the remedy be something described as faith as small as a mustard seed, which was at the time proverbially known as the very smallest of all seeds? This tension has led generations of believers and preachers to wrestle with the meaning of faith. If Jesus is using size to measure the problem, little faith, is he not also using size to define the solution, small seed? This is the crux of the dilemma. Is faith about size, or is it about something else entirely? Many theologians argue that the mustard seed is not about literal size but about quality. They suggest Jesus meant a pure or undiluted faith. But this interpretation struggles when we look at the language. The Greek word Jesus used to describe the disciples' failure, oligopistos, literally means little in faith or scanty of faith. It implies a lack of amount or measure, not a flaw in purity or consistency. If Jesus was worried about quality, he might have used a word implying weakness or inconsistency. Instead, he uses a term implying measurement, setting up the context for the metaphor that follows. If Jesus uses size to describe the failure, we must wrestle with the possibility that he uses size, or more accurately, a unit of measurement, to define the miracle-working solution. Here is the central argument this book will explore. The mustard seed is not given as a measurement of how much faith you need to possess in your heart. Instead, the mustard seed is the smallest singular and essential unit of action required to initiate the divine exchange. It is not about the size of the internal belief, it is about the singularity of the external trigger. The mountain-moving power is already present in the kingdom of God. But it requires an access key, a singular, undeniable, measurable act of faith, to unlock. The mustard seed, therefore, is not small faith but singular faith, representing the very smallest, purest and most essential measurable input that releases the greatest possible output. This idea shifts the focus from an internal struggle, trying to feel more faith, to an external action, simply doing the unit of faith required. In the chapters to come, we will discover how this measurable unit is reflected in the biblical concept of the $1 offering, the single touch of a garment, and the precisely numbered actions demanded by prophets. Chapter 2. Size or quality. In Chapter 1 we establish the paradox. Jesus diagnoses the disciples' failure as little faith, yet provides a solution, the mustard seed, that is also proverbially tiny. If the problem is smallness, why is the solution smallness? The typical theological answer is to redefine the word small. Preachers often insist that Jesus wasn't talking about the size or amount of their faith, but the quality or purity of it. The argument goes, the disciples' faith was not small in amount but weak or inconsistent in nature. If this were true, why do almost all major English translations from the King James Version (KJV) to the New International Version (NIV) consistently use terms that imply size? They choose words like little, small, or scanty, rather than weak, faltering, or inconsistent. This is not an accident of translation, it is an honest reflection of the Greek word Jesus used, oligopistos. The problem with weakness. The word oligopistos is a compound word. The root pistis means faithful or believing. The prefix oligos is the key. It means few in number, small in size, or scanty in measure. Whenever oligos is used in Scripture, it almost always refers to quantity or dimension. For instance, in Acts chapter 27 verse 7, the ship made slow progress, oligos progress. In Luke chapter 13 verse 23, Jesus is asked if only a few oligos are going to be saved. In these contexts, oligos is always numerical or dimensional. If Jesus had meant their faith was weak or failing in quality, Greek offered clear alternatives. He might have used a word like asthenes, meaning weak or sickly, or perhaps a phrase implying doubt or inconsistency. Instead he chose oligopistos, a word that fundamentally implies measurement and insufficiency of amount. This linguistic precision strongly suggests that Jesus was, in fact, discussing a measurable quantity of faith. The currency of heaven. The moment we accept that Jesus is discussing measurement, the entire conversation about faith is clarified. If faith is a measurement, it ceases to be a subjective feeling and becomes a transactional commodity, the currency of heaven. Think about money. When you go to buy a loaf of bread, the cashier never inspects the quality of your $5 bill. They don't say, "Sir, this is a very inconsistent dollar. I can only accept it as 50 cents." No one ever asks if your money is pure. Money is binary. It is sufficient for the transaction or it is not. If you are buying a $10 item and have $9, you have little money. The problem isn't that your $9 are impure. The problem is the amount is insufficient for the transaction. Faith, in the context of mountain moving or demon casting, operates the same way. When Jesus rebukes the disciples for little faith, he is not accusing them of being insincere. He is stating that the quantity of their action, or lack thereof, was not equal to the necessary transaction. This leads us directly to the concept of the $1 offering and the mustard seed action. The $1, like the mustard seed, is the smallest unit that still holds the full power of currency. It has no quality judgment attached to it. It simply is a unit, the measurable act required to complete the transaction and move the mountain. Chapter 3. The currency of heaven. If the analysis in Chapter 2 is correct, if Jesus used the word oligopistos to suggest his disciples had an insufficient amount of faith, rather than a problem with the purity of it, then we must view faith not as a spiritual state of mind, but as a spiritual currency. Faith, in this context, is the transactional medium of the kingdom of heaven. It is the single resource God has entrusted to humanity for us to engage in divine exchanges. It is, quite literally, the price required to release the miracle. The problem with pure faith. The traditional teaching often forces us into a subjective struggle. Is my faith pure enough? Is my heart clean enough? Do I believe hard enough? This turns faith into an exhausting, introspective performance review. If you doubt for a second, you are told your faith is flawed, and the transaction is cancelled. This is why many believers feel perpetually inadequate. But consider a financial transaction. When you go to a store to buy a soda for $2, you are participating in a fundamental economic exchange. You hand over the currency, they hand over the product. What if, instead of handing over a standard $2 bill, you tried to pay with a crumpled, stained, slightly faded, and heavily used $2 bill? The cashier does not pull out a magnifying glass and say, "I'm sorry, sir. The quality of this dollar is poor. It's too weak and inconsistent. I cannot accept it." The cashier accepts the money because it fulfills one singular requirement. It is the correct unit of currency. It doesn't matter if it's old or new, wrinkled or crisp, or whether you feel proud or ashamed to hand it over. Its value is inherent and non-negotiable. It either is a dollar, or it is not. Faith as a binary unit. This is the principle we must apply to spiritual matters. Faith is like money in this essential way. No one ever says your dollar is not a quality dollar. If you doubt, that means you do not have faith in that moment for that transaction. Faith, for the purpose of receiving a miracle, is a binary exchange, not a sliding scale of spiritual perfection. The miracle has a price tag. Every divine intervention, whether it's moving a mountain or healing a demon-possessed boy, requires a specific spiritual input. The faith is the currency. The required input is the measurable unit of faith, the mustard seed. The result is binary. You either submit the required unit, the currency, or you don't. The miracle either occurs or it doesn't. If you are trying to buy a $10 item and you only have $9.99, the problem is not the quality of your $9.99. The problem is the amount is insufficient for the fixed price of the item. When Jesus told the disciples they had little faith, he was saying, "You have $9.99 for a $10 miracle. The solution is not to try and make your $9.99 purer, but to find the missing unit that completes the transaction. This realization is incredibly liberating. It takes the burden of endless self-examination off the believer and places the focus on the singular measurable action, the mustard seed, that is enough to complete the exchange. In the next chapter, we will explore what this measurable action looks like in real life, examining the concept of the seed requiring planting, and how actions like the woman's single touch on Jesus' clothes perfectly define the mustard seed action. Chapter 4. Planting the seed. We have established that the mustard seed is not a weak or inconsistent faith, but rather the smallest singular measurable unit of currency required to complete a divine transaction. Now we must ask, what is that unit? What does the measurable faith currency look like when it's spent? The key is in the metaphor itself, a seed. A seed is potential, but it is useless until it is planted. A seed held in your hand can never become a mountain-moving tree. It requires a specific measurable action, the act of placing it into the ground, to release the life and growth already stored within it. Faith, like the mustard seed, requires planting. It requires a singular, physical, and demonstrable act of obedience that moves your belief from the subjective internal world, what you feel, to the objective external world, what you do. This external trigger is the mustard seed action. The woman's single touch. One of the most powerful illustrations of this principle is found in the story of the woman with the issue of blood, Luke chapter 8 verses 43 to 48. She had suffered for 12 years, spending all her money on doctors who failed her. She was destitute, ritually unclean, and desperate. Yet, she performed an act of singular measurable faith. The account tells us that she approached Jesus from behind in the crowd, saying to herself, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Luke chapter 8 verse 44, NIV emphasis added. Note the two critical components. The internal word, the belief. She spoke a definitive, absolute statement to herself. Her healing was conditional only on the act of touching. This was her internal declaration of faith, her fixed, non-negotiable price for the miracle. The external action, the currency. She then acted on that internal word by performing the most minimal, singular, measurable action possible, one touch. She didn't need to beg, pray for hours, or confess every past sin. She didn't need a sermon or a large donation. She simply needed to spend the single unit of currency her faith had determined, one touch. Measuring the miracle. When the woman touched Jesus' garment, power immediately left him. When Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" Peter noted that everyone was touching him in the crowd. But Jesus insisted, someone touched him with the currency of faith. The woman's action was numerically measurable. She touched him once. In the disciples' failure to heal the boy, they had little faith, insufficient currency. For the woman, her faith was sufficient because she provided the single measurable action required to complete the transaction. Her internal belief, which may have been laced with fear, desperation, and doubt, was entirely validated by her external act. This single touch perfectly defines the mustard seed action. It was singular, a unit of one. It was measurable, one action. It was irrefutable, an objective action that triggered an objective result. The woman proved that the problem is not a lack of power in God, but a failure to provide the smallest necessary unit of action required to unlock that power. Her words came to pass because of her action. This brings us to the most practical and applicable manifestation of this principle today. If the currency of the mustard seed is a singular measurable act, what is its modern financial equivalent? It is the $1 offering. It is the single measurable unit of currency submitted in pure faith, which we will explore in the next chapter. Chapter 5. The $1 Theorem. We have traveled from the paradoxical little faith, Chapter 1, to the measurable nature of faith, oligopistos, Chapter 2, and then to the transactional currency of the kingdom, Chapter 3. Chapter 4 established that this currency is spent through a singular measurable action, like the woman's one touch on Jesus's garment. But what is the modern equivalent of that singular measurable action? What is the irreducible unit of faith-based action we can submit today? It is the $1 offering. The purity of numerical 1. In monetary terms, a dollar is the smallest single standardized unit of currency widely used in American giving. It represents numerical 1. When Jesus referred to the mustard seed, he wasn't giving a specific botanical size. He was referencing the proverbial, universally understood concept of the smallest possible unit. Similarly, the dollar is the minimum practical unit of financial giving. Consider the numerical precision in the biblical commands that unlock miracles, a theme we will explore fully in Chapter 7. Naaman was told to dip 7 times. Not 6, not 5. The king was told by Elisha to shoot 1 arrow, implying a specific, measurable unit of action. The woman's action was 1 touch. In all these cases, the miracle was contingent on a fixed, numerical input. The number 1 is crucial, because it represents singularity and purity of intent. It is the beginning, the first fruits of action, and the definition of a single unit. A $2 offering, while still small, is already moving into the realm of multiplication and measurement by amount. A $1 offering stands alone as the purest expression of the unit of faith. Stripped of pride, anchored by faith. The true power of the $1 offering lies in what it removes from the transaction: human pride and calculation. When people give large amounts of money, their motivation is complex. They might be seeking recognition, trying to offset guilt, or operating under the mindset that more is better to earn a greater blessing. This dilutes the purity of the action by mixing it with the carnal desire for visible reward. No one, however, is proud of a $1 offering. A person who gives $1 is operating on faith, not financial clout. If a miracle happens after submitting that dollar, the donor cannot possibly take credit for the size of the gift. The immediate, irrefutable conclusion must be, it was the faith that did it, not the size of the offering. This is a powerful way to secure pure, singular faith. The dollar bill, like the mustard seed, is the smallest unit that still holds the full, non-negotiable value of currency. It is placed on the altar, stripped of the calculation that more might buy more favor. It is offered solely as the measurable act of planting the seed. If a $2 offering is 2 units of faith, and a $5 offering is 5 units, the $1 offering is the singular foundational unit. It is the spiritual equivalent of the scientific control group. When the miracle occurs, we know the input was exactly 1 unit of measurable action, leaving no doubt that the outcome was entirely supernatural. The $1 theorem states that the singular measurable unit of currency is the purest and most potent way to trigger the biblical promise that the smallest will become the largest, because it forces reliance solely on God's power. In the next chapter, we will dive deeper into this contrast, exploring how the human tendency to give more actually undermines the purity of the faith transaction, and why the smallest offering offers the greatest spiritual yield. Chapter 6. Beyond Pride. In Chapter 5, we defined the $1 offering as the modern, irreducible unit of measurable faith, the single mustard seed action. But why is it so spiritually potent? Why does the smallest offering potentially carry the greatest spiritual yield? The answer lies in its power to neutralize the two most common contaminants in the realm of giving: pride and calculation. The more is better trap. The carnal mind, trained by the world's economy, automatically defaults to the belief that more is better. We are taught that if a large offering yields a large blessing, an even larger offering must yield a larger blessing. This mindset turns the sacred act of giving into a spiritual negotiation, a high-stakes transaction where the size of the human input dictates the size of the divine output. This thinking is rooted in human effort, not divine grace. It treats God like a slot machine: the higher the bet, the higher the jackpot. When a believer gives a substantial sum, a five-figure amount, or even a large percentage of their income, the act, while often sincere, carries inherent dangers to the purity of their faith. The risk of pride: the donor may subconsciously seek recognition, or at least feel a sense of self-satisfaction. The gift becomes a source of personal accomplishment: I was able to do this for God's kingdom. The risk of calculation: the donor may fall into the trap of measuring the return. Since I gave so much, God owes me a big blessing. The focus shifts from the act of faith to the amount of the investment. This is why Jesus constantly praised the poor. He didn't praise the widow who gave 2 tiny copper coins because of the quantity. He praised her because she gave all she had, making her offerings spiritually huge, while the vast gifts of the wealthy became spiritually small. Mark chapter 12 verses 41 to 44. Her action was stripped of pride and calculation. The immunity of the $1 offering. The $1 offering defeats these two contaminants entirely. No one is proud of giving $1. The act is too minimal, too numerically small to serve the human ego. When a person decides to submit a single dollar as their measured unit of faith, they are completely surrendering the notion that their financial contribution could possibly buy God's favor or merit a larger miracle. If that person receives a life-changing miracle, say, healing from a terminal illness or the sudden resolution of a decades-long financial crisis, the attribution is instantaneous and irrefutable. It was the faith that did it, not the size of the offering. The $1 becomes the spiritual control group. In scientific testing, a control group isolates a variable. Here, the $1 offering isolates the variable of pure singular faith action from the contamination of human financial power. When we eliminate the capacity for human pride in the gift, we maximize the capacity for God's glory in the result. The $1 offering ensures that the focus is entirely on the act of planting the seed. The transaction is validated by obedience to the principle of the singular unit. The miracle, if it occurs, is clearly tied to the power of the currency of heaven, faith, and not the currency of earth, dollars. This is the power of the smallest unit. It forces us to rely absolutely on the miraculous nature of God, not the magnitude of our own resources. This brings us to the question of how we know what the correct measurable unit is. Is it always 1, or does heaven sometimes require a different number? In the next chapter, we will explore the numerous biblical stories where miracles were contingent on a precise, non-negotiable number. Chapter 7. When miracles require a number. If the central thesis of this book is true, that faith is the currency of heaven, and that the mustard seed represents a singular measurable unit of action, then the next logical question arises: is the number 1 always the key? The answer is no. While the $1 offering and the woman's one touch are the purest examples of the smallest sufficient unit, the Bible shows that heaven often sets a specific, non-negotiable price for a miracle, and that price is frequently expressed in a number. This is the prophet's prescription, the instruction from God's messenger that defines the exact amount of faith action required for the transaction. Naaman's 7 dips, total measurement. Perhaps the clearest example of measured faith is found in the story of Naaman, the Syrian commander suffering from leprosy, 2 Kings chapter 5 verses 1 to 14. Naaman came to Elisha, expecting a grand, dramatic healing. Instead, the prophet sent a messenger with a simple numerical command: "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times." Naaman was furious. His pride was offended, and his sense of fairness was outraged. He assumed the miracle required a quality ritual, washing in the better rivers of Damascus, or a great prophet's performance. But Elisha was not testing the quality of the water. He was testing the quantity of Naaman's obedience. Naaman was forced to accept a measurable, humiliating, and arbitrary command. He had to go in the Jordan exactly 7 times. 5 times would not have been enough. 6 times would have left him with only 6/7 of his miracle. The miracle was contingent on the completion of the total measurement, the 7 dipping units. This story shows us that obedience is a measurable quantity. The transaction had a fixed price tag of 7 dips, and the currency of faith was expressed by completing that precise number. Elisha and the tragedy of 3 arrows. Another powerful illustration involves the exact opposite, the failure to provide the full number. King Joash of Israel came to the prophet Elisha for guidance on defeating the enemy Syrians, 2 Kings chapter 13 verses 14 to 19. Elisha first instructed the king to take a bow and shoot an arrow out of the window, symbolizing the Lord's deliverance. This was a singular measurable action, the 1 arrow shot, which ensured a victory. Then Elisha gave the second command: "Take the arrows and strike the ground." The king took the arrows and struck the ground only 3 times, and then stopped. Elisha, visibly angry, rebuked the king. "You should have struck 5 or 6 times, then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat Aram only 3 times. This passage is extraordinary. It provides a direct, measurable equation. 3-arrow faith resulted in 3 victories, partial miracle. 5 or 6-arrow faith would have resulted in complete victory, total miracle. The king's problem was not that his faith was weak or impure, it was that his action was numerically insufficient. He had 3-arrow faith when the miracle required 5 or 6-arrow faith. He failed to provide the full quantity of the required action. The principle of measured input. The scriptures are filled with size and numbers that measure faith actions: the 6 water pots at the wedding in Cana, the 5 loaves and 2 fish used to feed thousands, the 153 fish caught in the net. Jesus himself uses measurement when he talks to Peter: "You of little faith." He is not talking about quality, he is using numerical dimension to measure the deficiency. Faith can indeed be measured. It can be measured in dipping units, Naaman's 7. Arrow units, the king's 3 verses 5. Touch units, the woman's 1. Dollar units, our modern $1 offering. The challenge for the contemporary believer is not finding the courage to act, but figuring out how many times the action must be performed, or how much the currency of faith must be presented. If the $1 offering is the foundational unit of faith, we must now move to the greater mystery. How does the ordinary Christian determine the key number for their personal miracle? Is there a hidden pattern underlying the biblical stories? We will seek to answer this in the next chapter. Chapter 8. Finding your personal key number. In Chapter 7, we laid out the evidence that miraculous breakthroughs are often contingent on a precise, measurable numerical input. Naaman needed 7 dips, not 6. King Joash needed 5 or 6 arrow units, not 3. The woman needed 1 touch, not 2. This inescapable fact presents the greatest challenge to the modern believer. If heaven assigns a specific number to every miracle transaction, how does an ordinary person find the key number for their own breakthrough? We do not have Elisha standing at our door telling us, "Go offer $7 or pray 5 times." If we are told to give, we are not usually given a number. If we are told to pray, we are not given a number. How do we move from the universal truth of measured faith to the specific actionable command for our life? The key lies in understanding that the number itself is not the underlying theme. The number is simply the currency unit required by the specific context of the story. The contextual currency exchange. Think of the Bible's miracle stories as different nations, each with its own internal financial system. In the Naaman nation, the currency of healing was the dipping unit, and the price was set at 7. In the Josh nation, the currency of military victory was the arrow unit, and the price was 5 or 6. In the woman's nation, the currency of faith was the touch unit, and the price was 1. Just as different countries measure their wealth differently, feet versus meters, dollars versus yen, each biblical scenario used a different unit of measurement, but the underlying principle was identical. God required total compliance with the unit of measure he had established. The underlying theme that heaven uses behind all the different stories is absolute and specific obedience. The miracle is released not when the person feels enough faith, but when they perform the full quantity of the required action. The 2 ways heaven reveals the number. For the contemporary Christian, finding the key number for our miracle involves a search for the divine directive. There are generally 2 ways heaven makes the price known. 1. The singular default, the power of numerical 1. If you are facing a spiritual mountain, and have received no specific prophetic or inner instruction, the safest and purest starting point is always the mustard seed action, the irreducible universal unit of faith, numerical 1. This is the principle behind the $1 offering. It is the single measurable action we can take today that guarantees we have submitted the foundational unit of faith, stripped of pride. By starting with 1, we are doing what Elisha told the king to do with the first arrow, performing the measurable action that ensures a start to the miracle. 2. The internal conviction, listening for the multiplier. If 1 does not unlock the miracle, the question shifts from "how much should I give" to "what is God telling me to do?" The problem is not that God is silent, but that we are not listening for the precise instruction. In the Bible, the multiplier, 7, 5, 12, etc., was always given by an external voice, a prophet, Jesus, or an angel. For the modern believer, that voice often comes as a singular, consistent inner conviction. We must learn to distinguish between a vague spiritual feeling and a precise, actionable, numerically measurable command. Has the Holy Spirit nudged you specifically to forgive one specific person? A one-time, singular action. Pray for a situation for 7 days. A 7-unit prayer action. Set aside 3 specific hours for study. A 3-unit time measurement. The pattern is that God's requirement, whether it is 1 or 7, is always clear, specific, and measurable to the individual who receives the instruction. From measurement to certainty. The beauty of measured faith is that it eliminates doubt about whether you have done enough. If you were told to dip 7 times, when you dip the 7th time, the transaction is complete. The doubt shifts from your capacity to God's promise. If we tell someone to submit a $1 offering, we are doing for them what Elisha did for the king, providing a clear, measurable instruction that helps them believe. It moves them past the paralyzing question of how much is enough, and into the clarity of, I have provided the required unit. The underlying theme is simple. The key number is the number that represents the total obedience required in your unique context. In the next chapter, we will delve into the profound theological significance of the number 1, the unit of purity, unity, and first fruits, to solidify why the $1 offering is the most potent spiritual trigger available to the believer. Chapter 9. Why the number 1 is special. We have established that miraculous breakthroughs are measured transactions, often requiring a specific number, be it the 7 dips of Naaman or the potential 5 arrows of King Joash. Yet throughout our analysis, one number keeps recurring as the purest, most foundational unit, 1. The mustard seed is universally recognized as the single smallest seed. The woman with the issue of blood performed a single touch. The king's successful opening action was shooting 1 arrow out the window. The $1 offering is the single, irreducible unit of modern currency. The spiritual power behind the $1 theorem is not just mathematical, it is deeply theological. The number 1 is not merely the beginning of counting, it is the principle of firsts which runs throughout the entire tapestry of the Bible. The foundation of unity. The very first principle revealed in Scripture is the singularity of God. The fundamental truth of the Old Testament is found in the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4. The number 1 represents unity and origin. God is the one source of all things. Purity and singleness of focus. There is no division in Him, and our worship must be directed toward Him alone. When we present a singular unit of faith, we are aligning our measurable action with the singular, undivided nature of the divine. We are presenting a pure, indivisible unit to the pure, indivisible God. This act cleanses the transaction of complexity, dual motives, and multiplication. It is a singular petition, presented to a singular God. The law of first fruits. The spiritual significance of the number 1 is most clearly defined in the law of first fruits. Throughout the Old Testament, God commanded Israel to consecrate the first of everything to Him, the first yield of the harvest, the first calf born to the herd. This practice was not about tithing a percentage, it was about honoring the principle of the beginning. The first fruit consecrates the whole. By giving the first unit, 1 unit, the entire harvest was consecrated and blessed. Establishes reliance. It was an act of extreme faith to give away the very first, proving that the giver trusted God for the subsequent larger harvest. The $1 offering, or the singular mustard seed action, functions as the first fruit of faith. It is the first, purest unit of measurable currency we release. By submitting this first or smallest unit, we are effectively consecrating the entire financial mountain we are facing. We are saying, I may only have $1 or 1 touch in my hand, but I submit this foundational unit to you, believing that you will bless the rest. This connects directly to the promise, the smallest will become the largest. The irreducible seed. The theological principle of the first fruit validates the singularity of the mustard seed. The seed itself is the irreducible unit of growth. You cannot cut it in half and still expect 2 plants. It must remain a singular unit to fulfill its potential. Likewise, the spiritual power of the $1 offering is tied to its indivisibility. It is a complete, standardized unit of currency. When you present a $1 offering as your first fruit of faith action, you are leveraging the most potent spiritual trigger available, the singular obedience that guarantees the focus is entirely on the faith, not the amount. You are acting on the principle of consecration, making your $1 the spiritual catalyst for the massive miracle you need. This foundation of 1 is the spiritual key that unlocks the massive power on the other side of the transaction. It is the beginning that releases the end. In our final chapter, we will synthesize these theological and numerical principles to provide a clear, practical framework for applying measured faith in your life today. Chapter 10. Proof of exact measurement. The temple tax. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Peter?" he asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes, from their own children or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." We have explored the abstract concepts of the mustard seed, Chapter 1, and the $1 offering, Chapter 5. Now we turn to one of the most remarkable and precise miracles in the Bible, a story that proves heaven operates not just with faith, but with exact supernatural measurement. The scene is Capernaum, where Peter is confronted by officials demanding the annual temple tax, Matthew chapter 17 verses 24 to 27. This tax was a fixed price, required for the upkeep of the temple. For both Jesus and Peter, the required amount was exactly 1 coin. The problem? They didn't have the cash on hand. The command of exact numerical fulfillment. If faith is the currency of heaven, then sometimes we need heaven to provide the physical currency of earth to meet an obligation. Jesus, being the Son of God, was exempt from the tax, yet chose to pay it to avoid causing offense. He then gives Peter a command that serves as the ultimate proof of measured faith action. "Go to the sea, cast in a hook and take up the first fish that comes up, and when you have opened its mouth you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take that and give it to them for me and you." This is not a general command to go fishing and hope for the best. It is a precise, 3-part directive based entirely on singularity and exact numerical fulfillment. 1. The singular action, the seed. Peter was commanded to perform one action, cast a hook. This is the irreducible unit of faith action, required to start the transaction. He didn't have to cast his net multiple times, or fish all day. He had to perform the single measurable action of planting the hook seed. 2. The singular result, the measure. He was instructed to take the first fish that came up. The focus is exclusively on the number 1. This emphasizes that the miraculous provision was tied to the singularity of the obedient act. It was not a matter of volume, it was a matter of specific compliance. 3. The exact fulfillment, the total measurement. Inside the mouth of that singular fish, Peter found one piece of money, a 4 drachma coin. This coin was the precise exact amount required to pay the taxes. Exactly 1 coin. The proof of heaven's precision. This story dismantles all doubt that God deals in measurable, exact quantities. The miracle was not a flood of money, it was a precise transfer of the exact currency required to complete the transaction. It shows the perfect marriage between the concepts we have explored. Singular action, mustard seed, Peter casting the hook once. Absolute obedience, key number, focusing only on the first fish. Total measurement, prophet's prescription, the result being the exact 1 coin required. Jesus didn't need Peter to empty his own pockets or give more than necessary. He simply needed him to perform the single required act of obedience, casting the hook, that activated the supernatural provision of the exact measured unit needed to satisfy the obligation. This should bring immense certainty to the modern believer. If God can supernaturally measure a coin and place it inside the mouth of the first fish caught, He absolutely knows the exact amount of faith action you need to submit, be it the $1 offering or the 7 days of specific prayer, to move your mountain. The power of the single coin confirms the power of the singular act. It assures us that when we provide the measurable unit, Heaven responds with measurable, precise provision. Thanks for reading. Tony Egar, Brisbane, Australia. Here are 5 scriptures of faith. 1. Matthew chapter 17 verse 20 NIV. He replied, "Because you have so little faith. Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." The seed of faith may be small, but its obedience carries mountain-moving power. 2. Mark chapter 12 verses 43 to 44 NLT. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on." Heaven measures giving not by size but by faith, by the heart behind the offering.